Montana Territory, 1883. The sky stretched pale and empty until thunder rolled across the grass. Then came the wind, low, rising, endless. A stagecoach rattled through the deepening rain. Inside sat Beatrice Lancel, her mother, Little Dorman, and Sir Redmond Hayes. Lightning flashed, the horses veered, and one wheel snapped in the mud. The driver's shout vanished into the storm. Beatrice steadied her mother. "Stay still, Mother. He'll bring help." But no one came. Rain hammered the roof. The coach rocked in the wind. A single horse approached through the darkness. A tall rider leaned from the saddle. "Anyone hurt?" His voice was calm and certain. "Our wheel's broken," Beatrice called. He swung down, mud splashing to his knees. "There's shelter north, a line camp. I'll take the boy first, then come back." Mrs. Lancel stiffened. "We can wait for the coachman. He won't return." "Not in this." He lifted Dorman easily. "Hold tight, little fellow." "Wait, take me too," Beatrice said, pulling loose one of the horses from the traces. "You can ride? I can try." He hesitated just a breath, studying her through the rain. "Then ride close." As she swung into the saddle, she called above the wind, "Your name, sir?" "Cameron," he answered. "Keith Cameron." Together they rode into the storm, rain slicing across their faces, the faint glow of the line camp their only guide through the dark. She had not come to this country for adventure or danger, only to visit her brother's ranch in the Montana Territory, a family journey across an ocean that was meant to be brief and civilized. But out here, nothing stayed as planned. The West had its own way of testing what a person was made of. By dawn, the clouds had broken apart, leaving the prairie washed clean under a rising sun. The air smelled of wet sage and wood smoke from the campfire where Keith Cameron crouched, feeding a twist of grass beneath the coffee pot. Beatrice stepped from the line shack, shawl drawn close. The sky seemed too wide, the quiet too deep after the night's violence. Keith rose when he saw her and brushed rain from his hat brim. "You'll find the trail easier once the ground firms up," he said. "Your brother's ranch is 10 miles north. I'll see you there myself." Her mother appeared behind her, chin lifted. "That will not be necessary. We have a coach waiting once the road clears." Keith only nodded and turned back to the fire. Beatrice watched the steadiness of his movements, as if no storm could shake him. "You were out in that storm alone?" she asked. "Cattle scattered on the South Range," he said. "Someone had to bring 'em back." The words were plain but heavy with quiet duty. When the sun lifted fully, he saddled his mare and led them north through the glittering grasslands. Dorman rode before him, laughing as the horse trotted. By noon, the low roofs of the Lancel ranch came into view. Her brother Dick strode from the barn, grinning. "By heaven, sis, you picked a fine day to meet the West." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and clean pine. Beatrice lingered at the window, watching Keith outside, sunlight striking his face as he laughed with her brother. She had known men polished smooth by society, but none who carried calm through storm. That morning she met one. Days settled into rhythm on the open range. Dawn came early, spilling light across the cottonwoods and the sound of hooves on dust. Beatrice watched from the porch, the brim of her straw hat shading her eyes. Her mother stayed indoors, declaring the sun too fierce for refined skin. But Beatrice found the air tasted of freedom, and she could not resist it. She walked the fence line with her brother, learning the names of things: prairie smoke, bunchgrass, alkali weed. The men stared at first, a London lady trailing her hem through burrs and dust, but she only smiled and kept walking. Keith was there most days, quiet as a shadow, his horse never far. Once she paused by the corral where he worked a young gelding, calm as river stone while the animal reared and blew. "How do you make him trust you?" she asked. "Don't make him," Keith said. "Give him reason not to fear." That night the men gathered for supper. Sir Redmond sat stiffly, his polished boots streaked with dust. When someone asked if he'd ever roped a steer, he answered too sharply, and silence followed until Keith told a story about a wild cow and a man who'd learned humility. Beatrice laughed. Sir Redmond's jaw tightened. Later she found Keith by the corral rail beneath a sky blazing with stars. "You tell stories as though you've lived every one." "Most folks out here have," he said. "The land teaches quick." "And what has it taught you?" "That a man can't outtalk the wind. Best listen instead, and what would the wind say of me? That she doesn't belong to London anymore." The night hummed low and alive as she stood there, his words lingering like the scent of rain before a storm. The day broke clear and gentle, sunlight warm across the hills. Dorman, restless, begged to follow his father to the south pasture. Beatrice relented with a warning smile and a promise he'd be back for supper. But when the sun began to sink, he hadn't returned. The ranch yard shifted from calm to alarm. Men mounted and scattered like hawks. Beatrice stood by the fence, scanning the horizon until her eyes blurred. "He knows the place," Dick said, forcing calm. "He'll have wandered toward the creek." As twilight deepened, Beatrice stepped toward the stable. "I'm going with you. You'd only slow us." "He's my brother's boy. I'll ride." Keith was already tightening his cinch. "Take the bay. She'll mind you." They searched into darkness, calling until their voices cracked. The prairie at night changed its face, vast, unknowable, alive with silence. Hours passed. The moon rose thin and white. Beatrice's throat burned from shouting. Then Keith appeared out of the dark, horse-lathered, face streaked with dust. "Listen." From somewhere north came a faint cry. They found Dorman curled beneath a clump of sage, his hand clutching a twig he'd used for a sword. Beatrice fell beside him. "Dorman! Oh, thank God." Keith wrapped the boy in a blanket. "Reckon you were braver than most grown men." They rode home slowly, moonlight turning the grass silver. At the corral gate she touched Keith's sleeve. "I can never thank you enough." "Don't need thanks. Just glad he's home." That night she understood strength not in what a man claimed, but in what he carried. A child through darkness, a calm through fear, a heart that asked nothing back. Morning light slanted through the parlor window. Mrs. Lancel sat stiff, teacup trembling with restrained fury. "Beatrice," she said coldly, "you've spent 3 afternoons walking the barns. You were not raised to follow hired hands." "They're not servants, Mother. They're my brother's partners in work. Mr. Cameron." "Mr. Cameron," Mrs. Lancel cut in, "is a common ranch hand, however politely he speaks. You forget who you are. We did not cross an ocean for you to throw away your breeding in the dust." Sir Redmond folded his paper. "Your mother is right. A woman of breeding must mind her company." Beatrice rose. "Refinement is nothing if it makes a person cruel. I'm going for a ride." Outside, sunlight cut the yard in hard angles. She saddled her horse herself and rode fast, too fast. A rabbit leapt, the horse bolted. Hooves thundered. A shout came behind, Keith's voice. He rode hard, seized her bridle, and dragged both horses into a sliding stop. Dust rose around them. "You could have broken your neck. Let go. You ride like the world owes you proof. And what would you know of that? Enough to know pride don't mend bones." Silence burned between them. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "You didn't. But you scared that horse half to death." Her laugh broke through tears. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you home." They rode side by side beneath a red horizon. That night she lay awake, her pride broken open like the storm before calm. The days turned hotter, the air dry as powdered glass. By dusk the wind shifted. carrying a faint scent of smoke. Keith Cameron saw it first, a red line trembling on the horizon. He rode for the house. "Fire," he said, coming from the south draw. "We'll turn it before it hits the creek," Dick answered. "I'll come," Beatrice said. "No, ma'am. Not this time. You'll need every hand." There was no arguing with her. She tied her skirts high and followed. The sun dropped. Smoke rose into a burning wall. Flames ran wild with the wind. Beatrice passed buckets until her hands blistered. Keith saw her once through the haze, face streaked with soot, eyes bright with will. "You'll choke out here." She waved him off. When the fire turned, he pulled her behind a ridge. They crouched as the blaze tore past, heat stinging their skin. When it cleared, the land lay black for miles. "You shouldn't have come. If I hadn't, I'd still be afraid. I'd rather face the fire than fear it. Guess the land's already claimed you." They walked home through the smoldering dark. Behind them, the fire died. Above them, the first stars returned. That night the men spoke of her courage. Keith said little, but when he saw her lamplight still burning, something deep inside him changed. The world had gone still again. The prairie smelled of smoke and wet earth. Out beyond the ranch, the last embers glowed faintly like stars fallen to the ground. Beatrice sat on the porch steps, arms around her knees, watching thin curls of smoke rise into the moonlight. Her palms were raw from the buckets. One blister had split open. Yet she felt alive in a way she hadn't since leaving London. The ache in her body proof she'd earned her place among the living. Keith Cameron walked from the darkness, a lantern swinging in his hand. His shirt hung open at the collar, soot streaked across his jaw. He set the lantern down beside her and leaned against the porch rail. The quiet between them was easy, the kind that belongs to people who've shared danger. "You should be resting," he said. "I tried. The house is too still. Most folks find stillness a blessing after fire. It makes me think too much." He nodded, understanding without words. They listened to the night, the windmill creaking slow, a coyote crying far off. "You weren't afraid out there," she said. "No time for fear when fire's running. You just work till the wind changes. And if it hadn't changed?" He smiled faintly. "Then we'd have burned together." The words hung there, quiet but certain, trembling between them like a vow neither meant to make. Beatrice looked away, voice low. "I used to think courage belonged to soldiers and kings. But it's different here, it's quieter. Maybe, but it costs the same." He glanced at her hands, saw the burns, and pulled a small tin of salve from his pocket. "Hold still." She hesitated, then let him take her hand. His touch was rough but careful, the motion steady as he spread the ointment over her palm. She felt her pulse rise, not from pain but from the calm that seemed to settle around them both. When he finished, he closed the tin and met her eyes. "You did fine today. You don't have to flatter me." "Wasn't flattery." He paused. "You were braver than most men I've known." Her lips parted, but no words came. The lantern flame flickered between them, and for an instant the night felt fragile, balanced on the edge of something that might break if either of them moved. Keith stepped back, lifted the lantern. "Get some rest, Miss Lancel. Tomorrow'll come early." She watched him walk into the dark, until the light vanished into the stars. Only then did she whisper, "Good night, Mr. Cameron." And in the stillness that followed, she knew how much of her heart had already crossed the line between gratitude and love. The fire had passed, but its scent lingered on the wind. Ash lay thin across the fields, and frost glimmered on the creek grass. Life on the ranch had turned quiet again, quieter than Beatrice liked. Sir Redmond Hayes waited by the corral that morning, polished boots dulled by dust, his hat too fine for the western light. When Beatrice approached, he turned, face grave, words measured. "I must speak with you," he said. She nodded, wary but calm. They walked beyond the yard to where the land opened under a wide, pale sky. "Beatrice," he began, "you've changed since we left England. I can't pretend not to see it, but I've come too far to let a few rough weeks undo what I feel." She folded her hands before her. "What do you feel, truly?" "You belong to gentler things," he said, "to refinement. I could take you back, away from this dust and labor. We'd be married by spring. You'd have comfort, safety, your mother's peace of mind." His voice softened. "I do love you." The words should have moved her, once they might have, but the space between them felt wider than the prairie itself. "Sir Redmond," she said carefully, "you're kind to speak so plainly. But I can't go back. Not as I was." His jaw tightened. Because of him. Beatrice looked toward the barn, where Keith and her brother Dick were mending a gate. Keith lifted the hammer, sunlight glinting along his arm. A man working because the land required it, not for applause. "Because of what this place has made me," she answered. "Because I've found something honest here." He turned from her, voice sharp. "You'd trade a life of comfort for the admiration of a hired man?" She flinched. "It isn't admiration. And he's not." She stopped, breath catching. "You wouldn't understand." "Then tell me," he said quietly. "Make me understand." But she couldn't. Words failed where feeling began. Silence stretched between them. The windmill creaked. Cattle lowed far off. "If you change your mind," he said at last, "I'll leave for Helena in 2 days. My offer stands until then." She nodded once. "You're a good man, Sir Redmond. I hope you find someone who sees it." He gave a small, formal bow and walked back toward the house. The distance between them had never looked longer. Beatrice stood alone a long time, wind tugging at her shawl. She watched Keith lift another board into place, his movements sure and unhurried, and she felt the quiet truth settle inside her. She no longer wanted to be admired, only understood, and for the first time she knew exactly where she belonged. The sky had turned pale and cloudless, a brittle kind of beauty that carried no promise of rain. Beatrice rode alone that day, following the creek west through the valley. The land stretched still and wide, the sound of her horse's hooves steady in the quiet. She rode to clear her thoughts, though they followed her like shadows. Her mother's disappointment, Sir Redmond's parting words, Keith's silence since the fire. The farther she went, the lighter she felt, until she forgot to watch where the trail led. Around a bend, peace broke. A man stepped from the brush, thin as a fence post, eyes fever-bright above the scarf tied over his mouth. A revolver hung loose in his hand. "Ma'am," he rasped, "I don't mean trouble, but I need your horse." Beatrice froze. The world narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat. Her mare sidestepped, nostrils flaring. "Please," she said softly, "if it's food or water you need, I can give that. But I can't walk 10 miles home on foot." He lowered the gun a little, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. His clothes were torn, boots split, the look of a man driven more by hunger than malice. "Didn't plan to scare you," he muttered. "Just been 3 days without a bite." Beatrice reached into her saddlebag slowly. "Then take this." She handed him a bundle of bread and jerky. "It's all I have." He stared at her for a long moment, the pistol sagging at his side. "You ain't like the others," he said. "Most'd run or scream." "Maybe I should have," she replied. "But you didn't shoot, and I didn't want to be rude." A sound broke the stillness, the drum of hooves. Keith appeared on the ridge, riding hard. The outlaw turned, raising the pistol again, but Keith's voice cut through the air. "Easy there, friend. You're tired, not stupid." He rode closer, eyes steady on the man's trembling hand. "Put it down. No one's looking to hang you today." For a breath, the outlaw stood caught between fear and pride. Then his arm dropped. The gun hit the ground. Keith swung down and picked it up. "You'll find a trail to town 2 miles west," he said. "Sheriff there might feed you before he jails you if you tell him the truth." The man nodded, shame dulling his eyes. He took the food, whispered a hoarse "thank you," and disappeared into the brush. When the dust settled, Keith turned to Beatrice. "You shouldn't be out here alone. I didn't plan for company. You handled him better than most men would have." "I wasn't afraid," she said. "Not after I saw his eyes." He studied her a moment. "You're not the same woman who came here in that coach." "No," she said, "and I never will be again." They rode home side by side, the sun lowering behind them, their shadows long across the prairie. No words passed between them, but the silence felt full, steady, certain, like a promise unspoken. That night, Beatrice lay awake, remembering how calm Keith's voice had sounded, how close he had ridden beside her. Somewhere between danger and dusk, her heart had made its choice. The moon rose full over the prairie, pale and wide as a silver coin. The ranch lay quiet beneath it, fences gleaming faintly, corrals hushed, lamplight dying behind curtained windows. Beatrice stood near the fence line, shawl drawn close around her shoulders. The air was cool and smelled faintly of smoke and sage. She had thought of turning back to the house more than once, but her heart refused. Hoofbeats came soft through the grass. Keith rode out of the dark, reins loose, his face half shadowed beneath his hat. He stopped a few paces away. "Dick said you'd come this way," he said quietly. "I couldn't sleep," she answered. "It's easier to breathe out here." He dismounted. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence carried everything they had held back: the fire, the road, the look they had shared, the weight of what waited between them. Keith rested his hands on the rail, eyes on the moonlit grass. "You remember what you told that outlaw, that you weren't afraid?" "I remember." "You were afraid," he said, voice low. "Same as I was, same as anyone with something to lose. You just didn't let it stop you." He looked up, eyes bright with reflection. "That's what courage looks like to me." Beatrice's breath caught. "And what does cowardice look like?" He smiled without humor. "Maybe a man who's loved a woman every day since he found her in a storm and hasn't had the nerve to tell her." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The wind stirred her hair across her cheek. She took one slow step closer. "Then you're not the only coward on this prairie." He looked at her fully then, and something in both of them gave way: pride, restraint, and every unspoken word. He reached for her hand, rough palm closing gently around her fingers. "I tried not to love you," he said. "Told myself we were too different, that you'd go back east and forget this place." "I tried not to love you too," she whispered, "but you make forgetting impossible." They stood in the stillness, faces inches apart. The world around them vanished. No fire, no storm, no England. Only two people breathing the same air beneath an endless sky. Their lips met, slow and certain, without haste or fear. The kiss carried all the words they hadn't spoken, all the storms they'd already survived. When they parted, Beatrice rested her forehead against his chest. "What happens now?" "Whatever the land gives us," he said, "and whatever we're strong enough to keep." The wind moved softly through the grass. Above them the moon climbed higher, pale against the dark, and for the first time she felt at home, not as a visitor, not as an Englishwoman, but as a woman who had chosen her life and the man who'd earned it beside her. The sun rose pale through a thin veil of fog. The land lay quiet and cold, the kind of morning that seemed to hold its breath before the day began. Beatrice stood on the porch, shawl drawn tight, watching the lone figure in the yard. Sir Redmond's horse was saddled, its leather dark with dew. A small valise hung from the pommel. He turned at the sound of her step, expression carefully composed, the face of a man determined not to betray what he felt. "I thought you'd gone before dawn," she said. "I meant to," he replied, "but I couldn't leave without saying goodbye." "You've made your choice," he said, "and I can't fault you for it. You found something here I never understood, perhaps never could. It isn't about here or there," she answered softly. "It's about belonging. I finally do." He gave a faint, wistful smile. "I envy him, you know. That cowboy of yours. He's rich in something no title can buy. He doesn't see himself that way." "He will," Sir Redmond said. "You'll make sure of it." For a moment they simply stood, two worlds meeting for the last time. He stepped closer, voice low. "I wish you happiness, Beatrice. Truly. And I wish you peace," she said, "wherever you find it." He took her hand briefly, then mounted. Before turning toward the trail, he paused. "I came seeking a conquest," he said quietly. "But you found a kingdom." He touched his hat and rode away into the mist. Beatrice watched until horse and rider blurred against the pale horizon. She felt no triumph, only calm, deep gratitude that the past had been met with grace. Behind her, the porch door creaked softly. Mrs. Lancel stood framed in the gray light, shawl drawn tight about her shoulders. For a long moment she said nothing, her gaze following the rider disappearing into mist. "Sir Redmond was a proper man," she said at last, her voice low and even. "But not the one who would have stood between you and a fire." Beatrice turned, startled by the gentleness in her tone. "I was wrong to think courage and refinement could not share the same heart," Mrs. Lancel went on. "Mr. Cameron may be roughened by this country, but it has made him something finer than polish." She touched her daughter's cheek briefly, then stepped back inside, leaving Beatrice alone with the wind and the slow lifting of the fog. From the porch, Beatrice looked out across the yard. At the far fence, Keith was checking a gate. He lifted his head, and their eyes met across the frosted field. No words were needed. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of sage and coffee, and Beatrice smiled, not at what she'd left behind, but at what waited ahead. Winter had brushed the valley in silver. Frost rimed the grass at dawn, and the sky wore the pale hue of polished steel. The prairie, stripped bare and endless, seemed older now, as if the fires and storms had written themselves into its memory. At the Lancel Ranch, a new fence line stretched across the southern ridge. Keith rode it slow, checking each post. Ahead of him, Beatrice waited at the crest, her skirts whipped by the wind, her cheeks pink from the cold. When he reached her, he swung down and stood beside her horse. Together they looked out across the valley, fields dark with winter soil, the creek flashing like a ribbon of glass. Smoke rose from the chimney of the ranch house, a sign of warmth and work. "Hard to believe it's the same land," she said quietly. "Land changes," he answered. "So do folks. Then I suppose I'll stay." He slipped an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, and they stood for a long while, letting the wind do the talking. Down in the yard, Dorman chased a hen, his laughter bright against the cold air. From the porch, Dick waved and called something they couldn't quite catch. Life moved on, steady, simple, real. Beatrice turned to Keith, voice soft. "Do you ever wonder what they'd say of us back in London?" Keith grinned. "That you lost your senses. And you? That I found mine." She laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that rose and vanished on the wind. They stood together on that ridge as the sun dipped low, setting the fields aglow with gold and fire. Their silhouettes stretched long across the prairie, as if carved into the land itself, no longer visitors, but part of it, bound by its calm. She had come to the frontier seeking a place to endure the storm. What she found was a man who carried calm through every trial, and a love that held fast in the open wind. He wore no armor, bore no title, yet he was her true prairie knight. Once, the storm had nearly taken her. Now she lived inside its calm.